Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly livestock market update. I'm your host, Megan Grebner, with us as always to talk all things markets. University of Missouri, Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
It is a very blustery and snowy day for you in your part of the country. I am not in that situation, but thankful to all of those who are out braving this weather to work cattle and hogs and poultry today, and all livestock really in general.
I certainly appreciate those that are out there, and I'm glad that I'm not in the cattle business today as much as I might like to be otherwise.
And our jobs are inside and not outside.
Exactly.
All right. Today we're going to talk some trade data. We're going to talk retail prices. We'll get into that supply and demand report that came out earlier today. But to kick things off, let's recap what happened in what is a very slow week in markets for both cattle and hogs.
Yeah, exactly, Megan. You know, the winter weather certainly slowed some activity that would be normal, and we'll see that in the data as we talk here today. But starting on the cattle side, live fed cattle down about 35 cents this week. Those feeder cattle markets, and I just remind everyone that last time we really reported on these were pre the holiday period. So we're really talking about 3 weeks since we've said anything about feeder cattle, but down $5 to $7 from what we were saying back in late December. The February live cattle futures contract was up 70 cents this week, and the March feeder cattle contract closed up $3 and a nickel. The choice box beef price was up $4.60 on the week, and on the hog side, cash barrels and gilts gained about $1.80 this week. The February lean hog futures contract was up $2.10. We also gained on the pork cutout value, up $1.22. That might be the first time in a few weeks you and I have talked about all three of those prices on the hog side being higher. Bellies were up pretty significantly this week, leading to what was the higher pork cutout value.
And on a week where we didn't do a ton of business, right? It would have been nice to do a little bit more business at these higher prices.
That's correct.
All right, we're going to talk weekly slaughter numbers. And as we take a look at those, we've been a couple of weeks in a row of holiday shortened week, a full week this week, but really not that much change in the business that we've been doing.
That's right. Cold and snowy certainly slowed both hog and cattle slaughter this week. USDA tells us for the week ending January 13th, a run of 549,000 head of cattle. That's actually 2,000 head less than the holiday shortened week last week, and down 112,000 from where we were a year ago. And on the hog side, also a small run, 2.279 million head of hogs this week. That's down 92,000 head from where we were a week ago, and down 410,000 head relative to a year ago.
I'm assuming we will play catch up as we move ahead, but we do have, for us, it's a shortened week next week. I would assume, as long as weather permitting, we're going to be running at full capacity to especially try to make up some gains there.
Yeah, and of course we all know cold in some parts of cattle and hog country. As we look ahead, I don't know what that does, but between that and a short week again, it may take us a little bit to get caught up. Those are opportunities, maybe for some prices to be higher than otherwise would be the case if we had higher runs.
We're going to take a look at monthly trade data. Let's start with beef exports and see what happened this last month there.
Yeah, so November 23 beef exports, we got out 229.3 million pounds of beef. That's actually down nearly 47 million pounds from what we did November of 2022. And when you look, everybody was lower. China, Japan, South Korea, Mexico, basically unchanged, but down slightly. And then everybody else was also down as well. When you look at those beef exports, when you compare them relative to 2022 year to date, we've been down 15%. In beef exports. I say not surprising given we have higher prices. And just to remind us, relative to 2015 to 2019, we are up 10% in 2023 relative to that period.
Let's talk pork exports for a minute there as we take a look at those. Really uh, uh, interesting numbers for pork exports.
Yeah, so I'll start by saying what went to China, Hong Kong, Taiwan down 34 million pounds in November relative to a year ago. Might suggest to everyone we were going to talk about lower pork exports in total, but we're not. Total pork exports in November out of the U.S. up 30 million pounds. We hit 608 million pounds of pork being exported out of the United States. So I keep reminding us, all right, so Mexico was important to this. They were up 18 million pounds November of 23 relative to November of 22. But everybody else, all these newer countries that we talk about moving pork products to, up 37 million pounds over the November of 23 relative to a year ago. So we're growing the list of countries that I think are important in terms of pork exports, which is a nice risk management strategy for the pork industry as a whole. And when you look at year to date, we're up 6.8%. And although China down 7% year to date relative to 2022, that all others up 15%, more than made up for the decline that we saw in China.
I think we can't underscore and highlight the importance of Mexico in this conversation. And I think it's interesting. I was reading an article today that, like, obviously, picnics and bone and hams have always been popular, but there's really a push right now to get more loins and to see an uptick in demand in that cut in particular. And what a great opportunity for the pork industry to diversify and highlight and find some markets, additional market share there.
Yeah. So when you think about total exports here for a minute, so year to date, 2023, we've pushed 6.2 billion pounds of pork out of the United States. Of that 6.2, 2.3 of it went to Mexico. So not only is it maybe providing some nice price strength in individual cuts, they're the big kid on the block when it comes to the number one trade partner for us on the pork side of the equation.
Retail prices out this week, Scott, as we take a look at those. How are we holding up on the retail side for beef and pork?
Yeah, so on the beef side to begin with, December 2023, the choice retail beef price was $8.01. That's 7.5% above what we were a year ago. You look at some of the individual cuts here on the beef side, sirloin steak prices, choice sirloin steak prices, 15% above year ago levels. When you look at year to date changes, we're talking about choice retail beef price up 5.2%. On the pork side of the equation, we were actually down just slightly December of 2023 at $4.82 a pound on the retail pork price. Your favorite sliced bacon also lost 2.6% year over year. And when we look at year-to-date numbers, we're down 1.8% on the retail pork price, and that's really driven by what was a nearly 9% decline in bacon prices 2023 relative to 22.
Scott, can we talk a little bit about, we talked last week about jobs and inflationary pressures as we are looking at 2024 ahead. How does everything kind of stack up, and what are you watching in terms of whether it's retail prices or demand and finding that sweet spot to make sure that consumers aren't pulling back on their consumption when we've been at higher prices?
Yeah, so for me, this is a lot about where retail prices go as we look ahead. And maybe pork is where I'm more focused than on the beef side. I think we're going to keep running some higher beef prices just because supplies are going to continue to tighten as we go through 2023. But on the hog side, I think pork side, I should say, we're going to have more supplies of pork on the market. What do those retail prices look like when we get 2-3 months down the road? We haven't had a great start to 2023 when you think about hog prices. And so I'm watching these retail prices because we need them to keep moving higher if we're going to talk about maybe some better hog prices for producers.
I mean, you keep dropping bacon prices. I can't help but think that people are gonna be like, let's just add bacon to everything.
Yes, yes. Well, so the other piece of this puzzle for me is, Megan, it wasn't that long ago you and I would have talked a lot about supply bottlenecks, and it was affecting the meat industry as well. I think we've quietly, in many cases, reduced, if not eliminated, some of the supply bottlenecks we've talked about in the past. How's that play out in 2024? What's that mean about from farm to retail, the costs that we have associated? Um, Maybe we're going to get some additional help from farm to retail if those supply bottlenecks are in fact not as problematic as they've been for the last 3 or 4 years.
So let's talk supply and demand numbers. Those were out today. A little bit of relief, I'm gonna say, for the livestock side of things in terms of inputs, and we'll get there momentarily. I will let you talk a little bit about 2024 red meat production first.
So I think the big change. So number one, I'll say I don't see a lot of big changes in what USDA gave us on the direct livestock side of the equation. If we look at some of the bigger ones, so total beef, pork, and chicken production, USDA raised their 24 estimate by 410 million pounds. Half of that, or sorry, a third of that was really an increase in beef production. Almost the remaining 2/3 was an increase in pork production. For me, the numbers that matter here. So beef production, relative 2024 beef production relative to 23, down 3.2%. USDA has been reducing the decline. A double negative. How's that for Friday afternoon? On the pork side, that level of pork production that they suggested in the January WASDE numbers would be up 2.4%. So we're pushing more supplies. I think that's the increase in pigs per litter, maybe more South Farrow than we thought out of the report, continue to drive higher production of pork for 2024. On the price side, not a lot of changes. They did lower their estimate of barren gilt prices for 2024 by $2. So it just tells me if that price estimate it holds true, it's a pretty tough year for pork producers. And as you alluded to, maybe inputs help us a little bit here.
Let's talk a little bit about that. Taking a look at USDA's numbers for corn and beans. What does that potentially do, or what opportunity is there to provide some risk management to if we're thinking about in terms of input prices and profitability overall?
Yeah, so USDA did lower their estimate for the current year corn price by a nickel to $4.80 a bushel. They also lowered their soybean meal price by $10 a ton in this report relative to where they were in December. So 480 corn, $380 a ton soybean meal. Those are moving in the right direction. I think two things to the risk management side of this. Number one, in the short run, we're going to have to watch South America. We keep getting different information about the size of that crop. A lot of concern about it's going to be a lower crop, which might suggest doing some price protection sooner rather than later if you're in that camp. For me, the other piece of the puzzle is it won't be long till you and I are going to talk about what plantings look like in the United States this spring. I could see a lot of interest in planting corn, which might be I'm going to hold off on doing too much risk protection, because if we plant a lot of corn, we have decent weather, probably keep talking about lower prices as we get further into 2024. And maybe the same thing begins to happen on soybean meal as well. But those opportunities, hopefully for some lower feed costs, provide some better bottom line news for pork producers in particular. And it could get really interesting for the cattle side of the equation. Feed yards being able to feed cheaper corn in particular could certainly increase demand for feeder cattle as we get further into 2024.
Scott, as we look ahead to next week, and probably a note here as well, we won't be on Friday afternoon. We'll be on midday on Saturday. And the newsletter will be delayed as well, and all of the postings will come just a little bit later. We'll be at Missouri Cattlemen's during their lunch hour, but we'll get to talk cattle on feed and consumer sentiment, two things really that are going to be important as we look ahead to 2024.
Yes, that's correct. And that cattle on feed report could be big for us. We keep watching placements to see whether what was a little bit of a slowdown in December placement numbers will continue as we look ahead into January.
Are you also using that too as we prep for the January inventory numbers that are coming out at the end of the month?
Absolutely. So it's going to be really interesting to see what beef cow inventory looks like out of the January 1, 2024 numbers that we get at the end of January's report. Now, just a preface for those that dig into these numbers a little bit further, don't forget USDA is coming back and giving us final estimates on a number of things as well. So what might look like a different number relative to what I'm going to call as maybe a 2.5 to 3.5% decline in beef cow inventory could come from the revisions USDA makes in the previous year's data as a lot of the 2022 census data starts to become available.
Scott, always great to see you. It'll be great to see you in person next week in Missouri.
Yeah, that's right. Welcome to Missouri again, Megan.
Always glad to come back. I'm gonna it's gonna be my secondary state, I think on my residency.
So if I say M-I-Z, you're supposed to say Z-O-U, okay? Just so you know before you come.
I'm still pretty sure in this household it's boiler up. Not great to see you.
You too.
So our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning or next week Saturday afternoon. Go to brownfieldagnews.com. Subscribe. You can also submit questions. And for a complete rundown of what happens every day in the commodity markets, make sure to check out John Perkins' Market Minute. Have a great weekend. I'm Megan Grevner for Brownfield. Thank you for tuning in to our YouTube channel. For all the latest in ag news, markets, and weather, and for more great video content, go to brownfieldagnews.com.